The importance of political systems for trade union membership, coverage, and influence. Theory and comparative evidence. The important influence of politics and the state on industrial relations has long been recognized, but this typically focuses on actors and ideologies, such as what policies left or right-leaning parties champion, and how a country's laws affect industrial relations. We add to this by introducing the importance of a country's political system for industrial relations. Specifically, we theorize and analyze how a country's electoral system's degree of representativeness, its effective number of political parties, and the presence of multi-party coalitions may affect trade union membership, coverage, and influence. In essence, a political system may create preferences and values that shape models of behavior that become institutionalized within varying social structures, to borrow some phrases from Seymour Martin Lipset. Political scientists commonly identify two key dimensions to compare electoral systems across countries. The first is the extent to which a national electoral system yields a legislative body that is proportional to the fraction of votes each party received. This is often measured using a country's level of disproportionality, which indicates deviations from the baseline of perfect proportionality or representativeness. A larger disproportionality score reflects a distribution of legislative seats that is less representative of the distribution of vote shares. Note in this Danish example, each seat share closely mimics the fraction of votes received by that party, meaning a system that strongly embodies proportional representation. Numerically, this is measured by a low disproportionality score, in this case 0.7. Compare this to the UK example, where there are large discrepancies between vote and seat shares, indicating deviations from perfect proportionality, captured numerically by a high disproportionality score, 15.1 in this case. The second commonly used measure is the effective number of political parties within a country's political system. This adjusts the actual number of parties to account for the relative strength of each party. This measure has two interpretations. More parties means more diverse groups have representative voice, or more parties means greater competitive fragmentation.
I hate you.
We also add a third measure, which is the presence of a multi-party ruling coalition at any particular time. This is simply measured on a yes or no basis. The first two measures change from election to election. This last measure can also change between elections if there is a change in the government. Our research then focuses on two broad questions. Theoretically, how might these dimensions of a country's political system affect trade union membership, coverage, and influence? And empirically, is there evidence of these relationships? We develop a unique theoretical framework in which a country's political system is predicted to affect unionization beyond factors related to a country's political economy that are already well recognized, such as legislative ideology and the country's variety of capitalism. Our theorizing can be broadly summarized as a culture of pluralism and inclusion at the political level, embodied in highly representative political systems, can create a culture of, or at least a tolerance for, pluralism and inclusion in the workplace. In other words, just as the state can establish values and norms for industrial relations, our premise is that a political system can also contribute to the values and norms of industrial relations, holding constant the ideology of the ruling government or legislative body. Under more representative and coalitional systems, unions have greater opportunities to be consensus builders, thus enhancing their value and societal legitimacy. This can spill over into greater legitimacy and influence for unions in the workplace, regardless of whether the legislature or ruling coalition is right or left-leaning. Moreover, because it is difficult for any single party to govern in representative and coalitional electoral systems, employers have an incentive to seek influence as a social partner rather than relying on influence within specific political parties. This, in turn, requires the business community to work with, rather than against, the labor movement. In certain types of political systems, then, there is a greater incentive for employers to embrace a culture of inclusion and compromise that recognizes rather than attacks the legitimacy of labor unions. Or consider a legislative body that isn't proportional and has few parties. It might be easy for labor interests to be excluded and thus have little legitimacy. But in an electoral system with lower disproportionality and a larger number of parties, there is a higher chance that the legislative body will have members who support trade unions, including legislators who are themselves union members. This representation can give unions legitimacy and visibility in the national consciousness, which can spill over to the workplace. As another possible channel, a legislative body with a greater diversity of members might enact policies that reflect a wider variety of views and interests, because a wider variety of issues would have at least some members as champions. Through all of these channels, we submit that a political system that is more inclusive or representative is expected to have stronger trade union membership, coverage, and influence. By contrast, weaker workplace unionization is likely to emerge under a fragmented political system in which parties behave competitively rather than cooperatively toward each other. Although we are unable to directly examine each of the theorized linkages, we believe that, taken together, they capture linkages with enough plausibility and diversity to motivate empirical analyses and spur additional research on electoral systems and workplace representation. Empirically, we use multiple European datasets to test the relationship between political systems and union membership, coverage, and influence using multivariate analyses across numerous European countries. 2 waves of the European Company Survey, containing measures of trade union presence and collective agreement coverage in the workplace. Round 5 of the European Social Survey, containing measures of the presence and influence of trade unions in the workplace. And all 8 rounds of the European Social Survey pooled together to analyze individual trade union membership. Taken as a whole, then, we analyze multiple dimensions of unionization using both establishment and individual level data. Across all 3 datasets, we find supportive results that a lower level of disproportionality, that is, a higher level of political representativeness, is a statistically significant predictor of increased unionization. We also find that multi-party coalitions often correlate positively with unionization. Across all 3 datasets, the influence of the number of political parties on workplace representation is always statistically significant and negative, which is consistent with competitive fragmentation. As we discussed in the paper, reverse causality or simultaneity problems are unlikely for disproportionality and number of parties, but is harder to rule out for coalitions. While there is more to be done, we believe that we have uncovered an overlooked area with important implications for comparative industrial relations and collective voice. First, the results suggest that political systems affect union membership, coverage, and influence in ways missing from the literature or treated purely as a control. Political systems should be added to the factors that are seen as helping explain comparative industrial relations patterns. Indeed, maybe it's time we considered a varieties of political capitalism approach to go along with the extensively researched varieties of economic capitalism framework. Second, the optimal political system for collective worker voice and representation appears to be one that achieves high levels of political representativeness while avoiding excessive competitive fragmentation. Although high-level electoral reforms are rare, maybe labor movements should consider broadening their legislative agenda to include electoral system reform. Third, while we are unable to test the specific role of social dialogue, our findings suggest that missing from conversations about social dialogue is the possibility that political systems that encourage social partnership may benefit unions at lower levels too. Finally, our research points to broader relationships between the state, political systems, and industrial relations than are typically recognized. We hope we have opened the space to consider the theoretical and empirical importance of political systems for other employment relations trends and outcomes. Number of parties, there is a higher chance that the legislative body larger number of parties